Hi, everybody, and welcome to Beyond Belief. My name is Shanna Fold, and I am bringing this program to you on behalf of Aish. I'm so excited about our material for tonight as somebody who really loves Latin culture and has dedicated a lot of my studies to learning Spanish and visiting Spanish-speaking countries. I think it's really great that we are going to be talking about how Judaism has such deep roots in Spain and in Sephardic culture and in all things Latino. There is a big Jewish community, and we are going to be speaking tonight with 4 Cripto-Jews. Now, it was not until recently that I started hearing the phrase Crypto-Jew, and so for anyone who does not know what that means, a Crypto-Jew is a person who practices Judaism in private, but publicly declares that they are of a different faith. So saying that you're Christian, but running home to light Shabbat candles on Friday nights in private. So I'm very excited to have our 4 guests. We're going to go around and hear from each of these professionals about who they are. And then we're going to ask some questions. And if we have any questions from the crowd, please let us know. We will be happy to take them at the end. So we are going to have Jeannie Milgram, Osman Darwich, Joe Maldonado, Christina Lee Fernandez, and we're bringing everyone in with us. These are professionals. I understand we have a fellow journalist with us here tonight, Christina. So thank you, everyone, for being with us.
It's great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Excellent. So I would love to just jump right into it. What we want to do is we want to hear the story of each of our 4 participants, and we're going to find out what are some of how they came closer to Judaism, how they found out that they had Jewish roots, and what they're up to now. So let's start with you, Ms. Milgram. Jeannie, can you join us?
Absolutely.
Thank
I
you.
am really excited to be here today with you. And I will tell you my story, my 3-hour story in a nutshell.
Bienvenidos, por favor, tell us everything.
I was born Roman Catholic in Havana, Cuba, and I always felt an affinity towards something that I didn't know what it was. I felt so out of place. I attended Catholic schools through university level, and I got married the first time very young to a Cuban Catholic man. And the whole time I was struggling because I felt attracted to something that was not Catholicism. I've always been a religious person, but I didn't realize till college age that something was Judaism. But I wasn't able to do anything about it till I had 2 children, and I was deep into my, once again, Catholic Cuban life. And I started studying Judaism, and I actually began at a Reconstructionist temple. I continued to a Reformed temple, and then I went to a conservative synagogue. Finally ended up at a Young Israel, a Orthodox little shtibel in my neighborhood. It took me 5.5 years to convert. I lost my marriage, all my family, and all of my friends in that process from my previous life. It was very difficult. I was very alone, but thrilled to be Jewish. I didn't convert my children. When my maternal grandmother died, several years later, I was already an active, functioning member of my synagogue, sisterhood president. But as far as I knew, I was a convert from this fire in my heart to just join the Jewish people. So when my grandmother died, and she had been teaching me Jewish customs all along, but I didn't put 2 and 2 together at all. Strange, because I had studied so much and it was such a long conversion. But when she died, she left me Star of David earrings and a Hamsa, and she was the first cousin of my grandfather. So I started researching my lineage because the pull, the attraction, the fire in my soul had been so strong that I wanted 2 things. I wanted to find out if I had been Jewish all along. So in a 15-year search, I did do a whole genealogy back to 1405, pre-Inquisition Spain and Portugal, an unbroken maternal lineage of 22 grandmothers who at the top had been burned in the fires of the Inquisition for not giving up their religion, and they had been practicing as Crypto-Jews. Today, we are descendants of Cripto-Jews because we're not hiding, but our grandparents and all our ancestors all the way back did. So they were caught again and again. I wrote several books. I wrote my 15 grandmothers, and then I wrote how I found my 15 grandmothers when I started being very active on social media and trying to help people just with a hand because I had been so alone. And then I wrote Pyre to Fire when I found all of the records of my family. And finally, the recipe of my 15 grandmothers is after my mom had denied all existence of anything Jewish in our home, I find hundreds of recipes that actually go back to the Inquisition, not hundreds of them, but I mean, the recipes are hundreds, but I actually found things that they would make believe they were eating pork chops. And so it was just an incredible background, ancestry, rich. And I went back to 1405 because I was searching for the Jewish name. And I really wanted the Jewish name. And I wanted to prove that people could find their Jewish name. And would you believe that this year, March 31st, on the day of the signing of the expulsion in Spain, 523 years ago, I found out my Jewish name from the tree, from the family tree. So it's taken me now 35 years to find that name. What I do today is I work with an organization called Kulanu. I reach out and I'm teaching Bene Anusim or Crypto-Jewish descendants all over Latin America, from Mexico, Monterrey, all the way down to Brazil. I'm teaching them. I hold classes on Tuesday nights. I'm teaching them elementals of Judaism. I'm holding their hand. I'm guiding them because it's such a lonely process. You don't come back with your families. The neshama it's a neshama. It's not in a body. So even if you're in a family, it's usually just one person. So I do that. I have been working extremely hard since 2015 to get all the Inquisition records in the world digitized. We have had already success in Portugal, Spain, and Mexico to follow, because the rabbis in Israel will only accept that Inquisition record as a measure of your, who is a Jew kind of thing. So I've been doing that to let people come back and be able to access their own lineage with this. So I'm actually very busy. I'm always, talking and just guiding people. By the way, all of the family came back. All of my friends from Catholic school came back. And really, I think I just, put a name to the face of a descendant from the Inquisition. It's so odd, but you know what? Here I am, and I am a super proud Jew.
Wow, what an unbelievable story. And I just think that there is no other explanation other than Hashem, that
Correct.
you could have felt such a strong spirit inside of you. Although I make jokes that my mom packs up the fridge real tight due to her trauma from her descendants of being scared that there wasn't going to be food, or those types of things, holding on to sentimental things because you're scared that someone's going to come in and take them. So I think that all of that was from your family, just getting passed down from generation to generation in your blood, and you could not ignore it. And that's just unbelievable. So my question is, people came back because you were indignant in your ideas and you proved it. And how did it come that your friends and families decided to accept you?
I think when I started having such a presence publicly around the world, and oh, there she is in the New York Times, and oh, there she is. So when that happened, all of a sudden, no, in general, I think that people came to, I think initially when you convert out of a religion, it's traumatic for everyone involved. But when I was able to prove that I was never really Catholic, that I was a Jewish woman all along, stuck in a Catholic school, I think that's when acceptance came in. Not from the family, because the family, it's a big shock. When I did it for myself and I converted, okay, fine, she's doing that, and she can't eat in the house, and she's doing all of that. But oh my gosh, when I brought the whole family back, that was dramatic for the family. and they are still practicing Catholics. Not so religious, but there's Christmas trees and so on and so forth. It was back in the late 80s. So we're talking a lot of years that my family has had to, let's say, put up with this. But they also understood, because my grandmother taught them to check for blood in the eggs, to take a little bit of dough when they were making desserts and put it in the back of the oven. All of this stuff was taught to us as a family. So my mother buried my grandmother, and that was my first clue. When my grandmother died, she died on a Friday afternoon, and I'm Shabbat observant, and Mom wanted to bury her within 24 hours. I'm like, you're Cuban, you're Catholic, bury her on Monday. But no, it had to be within 24 hours. So these customs prevailed through my family. It coursed through my veins. But again, it's about the neshama. No one else in my family has returned. My children, and everybody asks me later, so I'll answer it now. My children are grown adults with children. They fully understand their ancestry, but they are neither here nor there. They don't really practice Catholicism. They don't really practice Judaism. And I can understand they were brought up in an Orthodox home, and their dad was taking them to church on Sundays. So I can understand now that they're 35 and 40 years old. They are finding their own way, but it is definitely not going towards Judaism. So I still have hope for my grandchildren.
Okay, well, that's beautiful. What I want to do is ask you one more question and then move on to our next participant. What is out of all of the customs, you broke off pieces of bread, checking yolks for blood. What is one custom that you had such an aha moment when you were studying, or after your studying was done, that you realized, how could I have missed this very unusual tradition and not realize that it came from such a legacy of Jews?
Okay, so the one big tradition for crypto-Jewish descendants is sweeping to the center of the room. So this is a big aha moment, because when the Inquisition came, they took away all the mezuzot from the doorways. We weren't allowed back in the 1400s to have mezuzahs on our doorways. So the women wanted ownership of their beliefs. So they never again swept dirt or trash out the door. They always swept it to the center of the room and they picked it up. So the first time that I had told my husband, this is, by the way, I remarried a frum, Hasidic background man who accepted me. I don't know how, but we've been married for almost 30 years. So this custom, when I told him about it, he said, "Don't talk about that publicly. That's really weird." And when I got to my first Crypto-Jewish conference in Denver, and the first thing they say, "Raise your hand if you sweep to the center of the room," that was my aha moment.
Wow. So unusual. I've never, ever heard about sweeping to the center of the room. So that's really interesting. Thank you so much. We're going to come back to you. Sure. We have our other questions, and we have many of them. Osman Darwish, will you please join us on the floor?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. It's really a pleasure. It's just my journey has been one of I don't even know where to begin. I started out in a mixed family. Half my family from my dad's side is Sunni Muslim from Lebanon, and my mom's side is Cuban Jewish, and that side was mostly Catholic. But it was around the time I was maybe 12 years old when my mother told me, "Hey, we're Sephardic," and I'm like, "What does that mean?" And she was telling me about the Cripto-Jews and how our ancestors were Bene Anusim, how they were forcibly converted during the Inquisition to Catholicism. But my grandmother of blessed memory, she was the one who actually confirmed to us that in Cuba, publicly they were Catholic, but then on Friday nights, everybody had to be home and the house had to be ready. Everyone had to be around the table because the women would light candles, and then you couldn't do anything on Saturdays. But then the next day on Sunday, you would go to mass like a good Catholic, but in secret, you had this Shabbat tradition, which you couldn't tell the neighbors. It was a secret. And so that was the aha moment for me. growing up, it explained a lot for me because growing up in the midst of two different religions, I always felt like I always felt like I didn't fit into either one, and I didn't really, like I was a fish out of water, like I couldn't identify. And really for a long time, also going through a bit of persecution when I started to discover my Jewish roots. I was a Christian at the time, and a lot of my former friends started to go out of their way to make my life impossible at the time. So I just turned to my studies and to prayer, and I delved into Judaism and began a new life. I went to Israel, and it was a trip that changed my life, really. And today I'm proud to say I'm a Jew, and no apologies, Baruch Hashem. I'm happy to be here.
That made me laugh. I love the no apologies. I think that it's very important to be unapologetic about who you are. And if your friends can't accept it, which I'm quite surprised, because I'm from New York City and everybody's accepting of everything here. So it's difficult for me to imagine having a friend that wouldn't be able to accept me for being Jewish. But it happens everywhere. And it's actually unusual to live in such a diverse city. So that's amazing. So where are you now, and where did you grow up? I know that you had a Lebanese dad and a Cuban mom, but where did you spend your time getting raised?
I was born and raised in South Florida. I am still here. I was supposed to be studying in Israel right now, but 2020 happened, so still here in South Florida right now. But yeah, it's where I'm at.
Okay, well, that makes sense. I'll tell you that I'm supposed to be in Israel too. I've been in Israel for the last 2 years, but I'm waiting on my citizenship to come through, and that's taking longer than I expected. Also, I came back for a wedding in New York, and they kept me here because Israel closed the borders, and I had a lot of trouble getting back on in. So you're not alone. You're not the only Jew. You're not the only Yid in the US of A trying to make their way to the Holy Land. And that's very special as well, because I think so many of us connect to Judaism in different ways. And for many of us, it is at the Western Wall in Jerusalem, or it is when you realize that your people not only share the same religion, but share the same culture and have the same lifestyle and work on the same days that you work and take off on the same days that you take off. And it's quite amazing. So you had an aha moment when your mom sat you down when you were 12, but what's one tradition? I'm going to ask you the same question. What's one thing that your family did that you recognized was a little bit different than the rest of the families, and you kind of only reflected on it a little bit later in life?
Well, I would say two things. One of them being, and they both have to do with my grandmother of blessed memory. She passed away in 2010, but she always inspired me. She was very adamant about, not having any images. The rest of the family had, their saints and their statues and their images and all that. And, we respected that. But as for us, she wanted nothing like that in the house. And she would always teach me that, about how there's only one God. And, and the second thing is that very late, I always remember growing up that she would, sometimes I would be up at like 3 a.m. or something like that, and I would find her studying Hebrew books, Spanish Hebrew books, and I would always sit down with her, and she would share her wisdom with me, and that was something that always really sparked my my fire, to really keep going, to restore my family one day, B'ezrat Hashem, to Judaism. So that's it.
Wow, unbelievable. Thanks for sharing your story. We're going to move on to our next guest. Thank you so much. Let's have the reporter with us. I believe that you are a reporter, Christina.
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Yes.
We got
Hi.
you. How are you?
I'm great. Very happy to be here. So I am from São Paulo, Brazil. And I was raised in Miami, and I became a journalist here in the United States. And I think when I was about 13 and I started to I had many Jewish friends growing up, even though I was born in a Catholic family and everybody in my family is Catholic, but they're not very religious at all. So when I was about 13 years old, I started going to lots of bat and bar mitzvahs and hanging around a lot of Jewish families, and I felt, and I just knew I had, like, I wasn't comfortable at all going to school and with the Catholic teachings. I would go against what they would say. I wouldn't really believe, question everything, and they would be very upset because in Catholicism you don't question anything, you just accept it. And in Judaism it's actually the opposite. So my story is very similar to that of Jeannie's. I went to Catholic school, and then I married a Catholic guy, and I had my kids. And after divorce, I said, I have to follow this calling that I have to Judaism. Even though actually, when I got married to my Catholic husband, one of the requirements, let's say, to marry me was to have a lot of Jewish traditions in my wedding. And I wanted to have a Jewish home, even though he wasn't. I said, it's just very present in me, and it makes me feel better if I can do it this way. And he said, okay, fine, do whatever you want. And I did. And so once I got divorced, I said, I'm going to follow this path. And I started to study Hebrew, the language, the modern Hebrew. I'm a linguist. I love languages. I speak 5 languages. And so Hebrew was an amazing challenge. But I felt very comfortable in the Reform movement. And I converted in the Reform movement, and I felt very empowered by being taught by women rabbis. And then I went to Israel many times already. And like you said, at the wall, there's a huge connection. It's amazing, the feeling that I felt like I came home. When I actually, the first time I went, I turned 50. And I went to the wall on my birthday, on my 50th birthday, and I said, from this moment on, the next 50 years, I will start my Jewish journey and bring back to where my ancestors have been calling me, because there actually is no reason why I would want to be Jewish by the way I was raised by my family. So this was like a deeper calling. I really believe it came from ancestors. So my family is my father's side is from Spain and Portugal. And I met Jeannie when I read her first book, and I called her up right away, and she actually answered the phone, and she invited me over, and we started going through all of these details that I was finding in my research. Like, for example, the names. So the Cripto-Jews, they would pick names of nature. They had to pick a new name when they became Christian, became in hiding, like they were Jews in hiding. So they had to pick a new name. And a lot of them would pick names related to nature, like trees or plants or rivers or bridges. So that's one of the signs when you have a lot of names, Hispanic or Portuguese names in your last name. Like, for example, my grandfather is Carvalho, which is oak tree. And his mother was Roseda, which is rose bush. And so this is another indication that you come from a lineage of the hidden Jews, because they had to pick a new name.
And why were they choosing nature? Was it just who came up with that?
Well, I have no idea who came up with it, but I think that maybe, for example, I believe the reason why they pick trees is because the tree of life is so symbolic in Judaism, and their Jewish tree was being cut down or what was finished, and they had to start a new tree or a new branch or a new path. So they would pick river or the bridge, or maybe it was just next to their house. They had a river, and they became Joe River. Or Rios is a very Jewish name. Or another interesting one in Brazil, at least, a very Jewish last name is Coelho, and Coelho means rabbit, and it's not a kosher animal. And so they would pick things on purpose to make them really seem that they weren't Jewish in hiding, because it was so dangerous for them to admit that they were Jews. So they would do the most extreme things to show the community that they were actually Christians. Just like Jeannie said, they would make recipes that would pretend that they were having pork chops, but it was actually a recipe made with bread, with the bread being shaped like a pork chop. So then the people that saw them eating, oh yeah, well, they're eating pork, they're not Jews. But they would, yeah.
Yeah, I did a bit of research as well and called up a friend of mine. His name is Juan Antonio Caldez Rodriguez. He's in Mallorca, Spain. And there is a very large community of Cripto-Jews from Mallorca. And he explained to me that they would, like you said, that the Jewish community would go through such lengths to hide their Judaism that they would have all of these special recipes and techniques. For example, making chicken sausage, but making it so spicy and so hot that you could barely really taste or tell what meat was inside of it. And even going so far as to inviting neighbors over so that they could enjoy their pork sausages together without people really realizing what they were eating. And so what you're telling me is so interesting. Do you know the year that your family moved out of Europe and into Brazil?
Well, so like I was saying, my father's side came from Spain and Portugal, and my mother's side actually came from Italy. And the Italian side is the one that I have the most documentation of, and they came in the early 1900s, or actually they had a son in 1891, so they came right before 1900. The Portuguese side came a lot earlier, so that's the Italian side. And the village that they were, the village that this family was from is called Rovigo, and it was a very Jewish area before the war, and now there's barely any Jews left in that part of Italy. But I mean, I find these pictures and I find it to be, very curious that they were Jewish, because they had, and also my grandmother, and it was the maternal grandmother, like the one that Jeannie was talking about, she also swept to the middle of the room. She also threw the pieces of dough to the back of the oven to make like a blessing for abundance. She also checked for eggs. So all of these things, it's so interesting to see how they would pass these from generation to generation, but they wouldn't say why. So by the time I got to my grandmother, she would just say, well, that's how we do it, because that's how my mom did it, and that's how her mom did it. But they didn't explain. And that's another thing of Cripto-Judíos. They didn't explain. They just said, just do it this way. And it was another way to protect them.
So I have chills all over me from this. It's really quite wild to hear how people have passed things on, and also the way that people hold on to things, I think, is really unbelievable. Being able to hold on to that tradition, remembering it, having something that somebody taught a relative 4 generations behind you, and it's still being so present in your life. But I think the wildest, craziest part is, without any prompting, you felt a rebellion to the Catholic institutions that you were a part of. I think that's sort of the wildest part, is you having a deep burning sensation inside of you that, no, I don't want to be a part of this. This goes against everything inside of me. And I want to ask you the same question, which is, what is one, aside, if you have another one, not the sweeping to the center of the floor, but if you have a tradition that hit you, that maybe you are showering or getting into bed one day and you said, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I missed that one.
Well, the thing is that my family, they never really, I think I'm the only one, I'm the only spirit in my whole family that really had this calling. So nobody was doing like hidden Jewish things, and one thing that Jeannie always says, because Jeannie is my mentor, once I found her, I started like really understanding a lot of things. When we come back, we are souls that are just lost souls, and we come back one by one. We don't come back like a whole family of Russian Jews that went to Israel, or a whole group of Ethiopian Jews. We are alone. So I am the only one in my family. I came back alone. I've created an entire Jewish community with friends, and this is my Jewish family. This is also like Jeannie is part of my Jewish family. And I think I've been very lucky because my family is very accepting, and they understand that I'm doing this for myself. They don't really get it for themselves. They're like, well, we don't feel that, but okay, you do. But we come back alone, and it's very challenging. It's very, very challenging. So I don't think I had a moment. I just always had this deep feeling. And once I got into the Judaism, and I was very, I understood it better. I knew that I was where I had to be. That's where I found my peace. When I finally really understood and converted and just started to really live a Jewish life, I knew that I was at peace with myself.
Okay, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I want to bring up next, last, but certainly not least, Mr. Joe Maldonado. Please join us. Hi, Joe.
Howdy. Good evening.
Good evening. Buenas noches. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So where are you speaking to us from?
So I'm speaking to you from upstate New York, Rome, New York. Rome, New York, which is near Utica, near Syracuse. And I've been living up here now for about 25 years.
Wow. Well, I have to tell you that I went to SUNY Oswego, so I certainly know those roads. I know that area. Super beautiful part of New York. I always tell everyone when they come to New York, you don't want to just go to the city. You want to really explore the Finger Lakes, and you want to go to Lake Ontario, and you want to really get up there because it's breathtaking. So tell us a little bit about your family and how you arrived at recognizing your Judaism.
So my story is a little bit different than the other three speakers in that I grew up in an evangelical Protestant home. So I am fourth generation Protestant on my father's side and on my mother's side. My family on both sides were generally very anti-Catholic. They had nothing to do with Catholicism. And I never understood what that was all about. All I knew was that we were Protestant. I grew up going to services 7 days a week. The church that I attended, men sat on one side when I was a child, and women sat on the opposite side. We had a summer camp where swimming pool, a 6-foot fence, and women took 2 hours, men took 2 hours. So there was a lot that separated us in terms of the life that we led from the general public. Our lifestyle was very consistent with the lifestyle of Orthodox Judaism and Mennonites. In fact, the other Protestant church that we had fellowship with and were friendly with were the Mennonites who had a service at church about a block away from us. But I started doing genealogy work when I was in high school. My father and my mother are both born in Puerto Rico. My father's side on his mother's side are from Barcelona. And I took a curiosity and interest in researching that line. And so in high school and in college, I was able to get back to the late 1700s for both my families. And that would involve my going down to Puerto Rico, sitting in a Catholic church, going through these old books of the baptismal books, the marriage books, the books of deaths, and jotting down names. And I did this as a hobby through college. In college, my best friend was someone who was an Orthodox Jew. And you know, for some reason, I was attracted to Judaism and found it to be a very fascinating faith and the people. And part of that was that as a Protestant in the church that I grew up in, we understood that these were God's chosen people. And so I kept doing my genealogy work. I got into medical school and wound up at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, which is, again, part of Yeshiva University. So I was at an Orthodox institution, and spent my medical school years and my residency years there. So I spent 10 years at Einstein and really became acquainted with all the customs and traditions. So kosher meals, we had kosher elevators, everything. And so I knew that there was an interest in that, and I kept doing my genealogy after I finished medical school. And subsequent to that, somewhere in the early 2000s, I got an email from a fellow Harry Stein who reached out to me and said, you know, your mother's surname is Sephardic. And at the time, the experience that I had had as a Protestant male at Einstein was the equivalent of perhaps an Orthodox Jew going to Oral Roberts or Notre Dame. You sort of really feel like a fish out of water. So when someone told me that my mother's side was probably Sephardic, I said, no, we're Spanish and Italian, thank you very much. But kept that in the back of my mind. And then about 2014, Spain came out with this idea of granting Spanish citizenship to descendants of Sephardic Jews. And I remembered that I really had only gotten back to the 1700s on my mother's side. So I went back, and lo and behold, in doing some research, I found the tree of a physician who I now find out is also related to me. He had done his tree back to the 1400s. And on one of his branches, he dead-ended on my great-great-great-grandmother on my mother's side. And when I looked at that tree, I made some incredible discoveries. Number one, we had these things that were called dispensations for consanguinity. So the Catholic Church given them dispensations to be able to marry second, third, and fourth cousins. And there were just generations of these types of things, which meant that the family was marrying people that they knew and that they were related to. So that struck me as kind of odd, particularly when I've cracked a lot of jokes about people who inbreed in West Virginia. And now I was discovering that this was my particular background.
And sure, for many other people also,
yes.
I think generations ago, it was much more common for cousins to marry cousins. Even 2 generations ago, I think that people were doing that.
Yes. And then I started seeing that I had these ancestors who had gone from Spain and from Portugal to places like Antwerp in Flanders. They had gone to places like Cortege in Flanders. They had gone to London. They'd gone to the Azores. They'd gone to the Canary Islands. There's one branch from Mallorca. And then they wound up coming to Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Mexico, and then came back to finally end up in Puerto Rico. And I started asking myself, why did these people make these migrations? What led them to go to these places? And I realized that this was the pattern that Jews followed from the expulsion. And I learned about this group of people called the Anusim, the Bene Anusim, the children of those that were forced to convert. And I started reading up on them, and I started finding out that there were customs that they had that I didn't know anything about. So I went to my mom and I said, Mom, did you light candles on Friday night, or did your grandparents light? And she said, no. But then I got this list, and I realized my mother sweeps to the center of the room. My mother will never eat an egg outside of the house because she has to go through that egg herself. And since she doesn't know if the other person has gone through that egg, she will not touch the egg. I realized that in my home, when my mother made meat dishes, we had meat dishes. And when she made dairy dishes, they were dairy dishes. But we didn't have a meat and cheese lasagna. We didn't have a cheeseburger. If we did those, it's because I did that or my brother did that. But never would my mother ever make a dish that mixed dairy and meat. And when I asked about that, she had no explanation. That's just the way that they did things. I discovered that my great-grandfather would keep planks of wood in the attic so that when someone died, he could make a quick coffin and then they would get buried within 24 hours. All the mirrors would be draped in the house, and then they would sit for 7 days. They would have chairs and receive people at the house while they said the rosary. And I realized afterwards that what they were doing was they were sitting Shiva, but they were using a rosary to hide the fact that what they were doing was to sit Shiva. My grandmother would shechter the chickens, and I've got videotapes of my mother and her sister explaining how it is that they shechted these chickens, how they had to salt them, how they had to boil them, the entire process that any rabbi would say to you, that's proper shechtering. So between the customs, the lines, I discovered that every name in my mother's side of the family dating back to the 1400s is a name that is identified with the Sephardic population. Not all the names on my father's side, but most of the names. And so I had this existential crisis. What do I do about this information? Because my friends would say to me, Joe, if you just had Norwegian background, does that mean that you're going to become a Norse now? Why do you want to do this? And so what I did was, I reached out to people, and I found a fellow, Jack Cohen, in Israel, who invited me to a conference in Israel on mapping the diaspora of where these Spanish Jews and Portuguese Jews went after they were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula. I went out to Israel, and I felt like Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I met all these other people who were feeling the same thing I was feeling. We didn't know why we were drawn to this place, but now we were all together. We all realized, so you're having the same experience I'm having. I went to my first Sephardic shul, and I sat there, and I knew I was home. I knew I was home.
My goodness!
And,
wow.
Ginny sat down with me. I was in Israel, and she said, Joe, at Mount Sinai, God gave the Jewish soul to the Jewish people. And since that time, each of us has a little piece of that soul that was given at Mount Sinai. And so I came back, and I said, I've got to come home. And I contacted a friend of mine who sat with me at the Medical Society for 32 years, who's an Orthodox Jew. His name is Sana Block. And I said, Sana, this is my story. And I think I need to come back. And so Sana took me to Rabbi Peretz Steinberg, who's a rabbi with Aguda Israel. And he took me up to this place called New Square, which is in the heart of Monsey, which is very frum. It's the Square Rebbe. And it frightened the daylights out of me because it wasn't what I was looking to do. But the Square Rebbe listened to my story, saw my evidence, and said to my rabbi, this is not a conversion, this is a return. But do it, give them conversion papers, because too many people have no clue what's going on with the Bene Anusim. And if you give them papers that are not conversion papers, they won't know what to make of these papers. And so I came back, met with the Beit Din, did my studying, and on Yom HaShoah 2016, Rabbi Steinberg and his Beit Din brought me back to Israel. And since then, I did my genetic testing on both my mother and my father's side. We're RM269, which is the Portuguese line that we have, and that is the most common genetic group of Portuguese Jews. I've found my 8th great-grandmother, who comes from Jewish ancestry, who descends from the Verdugo family in Morocco, which is a rabbinical line. I found a 5th to 8th cousin who is a rabbi in Germany, and tells me that the only way we could be connected is through his grandmother's side, because she was originally Portuguese, and she is a descendant of the brother of the Baal HaTanya, who is the first Chabad rabbi. And in that process, I also discovered my 8th great-grandfather's eldest son married at the Bevis Mark Synagogue in London. And so I was able to get a copy of the ketubah for that marriage. And this year, I discovered on my mother's side a branch that family that is in Curacao. They're buried at the Jewish cemetery in Curacao. And one of the descendants there actually wound up dying at the Holocaust. He wound up getting sick, went back to Holland, was in a hospital, and during World War II, Nazis took 12 individuals from that home. And there you see a picture of Edgar Alvarez Correa and his grandparents who are buried at the cemetery in Curacao. But Edgar wound up dying in Auschwitz. And so it's been an incredible journey for me, as I have now found 8 cousins of mine who have made conversions and returns. And it's amazing to me the number of people that I meet, that when we look at the trees and we see where we come from on the island, we discover that we have a common ancestor. So it's been an incredible journey, and it's exciting. And if you look at the tree, you see here the green Star of David's is my ancestors. Through that line, I have found Jews that either are historically documented, or there is something in the tree that shows that they were clearly Jews. The red ones are the genetic lines that are RM269 from Portugal. And I have 2 ancestors that wound up dying in the Inquisition. One died in Seville, and the other one was burnt at the stake in the Canary Islands.
How did you find out that information about her being burnt at the stake in the Canary Islands?
Just really doing a lot of research. You know, Google names, you discover a name in your tree, and you Google Scholar is great because it gives you all the good, peer-reviewed literature. And so, through doing research through Google Scholar and some of the academic websites, you find the historical documentation that gives you the story on some of these folks. The Canary Islands has a lot of great history and resources of the Jews that were there.
Wow.
And it's very interesting because many, if not most, of the people that were in the Canary Islands were Jewish, and 40% of the population of Puerto Rico can trace its ancestry to the Canary Islands. So that means that there are a lot of people in Puerto Rico who have Jewish ancestry, don't know it. My mother's hometown, Utuado, has a region that's called Sector Judea. And the town next to them is called Lares, which is a town in which Ladino was spoken. And the country folk in Puerto Rico are called Jibaros, which is a diminutive, people feel, of the word Hebreos, Jibaros, Hebrews. So there's a very rich Sephardic history that is untold because people hid so much of these traditions in Puerto Rico.
This story
so now I practice in upstate New York. I'm Shomer Shabbos, and I keep kosher, and I've been at my Orthodox shul now for 5 years.
Well, kol hakavod to you. This is absolutely unbelievable. I've had chills all throughout my arms from all of these stories. I am left with so many questions, but I am going to do a couple of things. First, whoever's watching us right now, I want you to add a question to the chat. There's a comment box right there on YouTube where you can put this in and you can ask a question. In the meantime, I have a couple of academic questions that I would like to go through, and I would like to call up Jeannie to the stage so that we can ask this question. So, Jeannie, everyone here has done such research into their own backgrounds, but I know that this is an interest for you and you've taken it on quite professionally. What I want to ask you about is para hacer sábado. to do Saturday or to be Saturdaying, which I've never heard this expression before. It's Hacer, sábado, Sabado, for Saturday. And I reviewed it over with my Spanish friend, who laughed and said, yeah, it's just something that we say here in Spain. Can you tell me a little bit about what it means to hacer sábado?
I actually don't know that terminology.
Okay. So I'll tell you what I learned.
Maybe
and then
one of the other speakers. I've never heard that terminology.
Okay, so from my research, para hacer sábado means to take Saturday as a day of full cleaning. So what I learned was that in order for the Jews to pretend that they weren't keeping Shabbos, they would throw the windows and the doors open of their homes, and they would do an abundance of cleaning, because I suppose that if you weren't Jewish, you might not know. You might have a general understanding that work isn't done on Saturday, but what kind of work is a nuance that you might only know if you were Jewish. So, for example, you can sweep the floor on Saturday, but you might not be able to use a sponge to absorb water, for example. So, to do Saturday is a full day of cleaning in the public. And I also learned that Jews would put up the fire in the chimney, so that when officers were passing by, it would be assumed that they were cooking on Saturday, but really
Correct. I can speak to the Saturday thing. I didn't know the term hacer sábado, but I've had more than 50 relatives killed in the Inquisition fire, from Cadiz, Spain, to to Lisbon, Canary Islands. Then they went to Cartagena, Colombia. So I've had my family killed in Inquisitions all over the world, maternal and paternal line. So at least 4 of them were burnt at the stake for cleaning the house on Fridays. So I understand. So that's how I'm coming into what you're saying. So they would they would change the sheets or wash sheets on Friday, getting it ready for Shabbos, and then they would be. So I assume that led into this other custom that you're saying, to throw open the windows on Saturday to make believe you were cleaning, because I have at least 4 that they burned because of cleaning on Friday. So I understand that. The thing when I said about the pork chop earlier, so what they would do, this is a beautiful pork chop. Christina has made it many times. It's made of French toast. And so what they would do is that they would burn a pork chop in the fire on Shabbos. They'd throw a pork chop in the fire so the whole house and the whole neighborhood could see that they were cooking pork on Shabbos, and then they'd be eating this French toast shaped like a pork chop. So there was a lot of things that they were doing behind. And if you go through the little villages on the side of Spain and Portugal, and I believe I sent some pictures up of village streets, and I even sent a picture up of the hidden synagogue in the village of my ancestors. I sent that one before, where you can see how the house split open. They would put on their doors, they would put crypto crosses, they're called. But these were crosses that had an element of Jewishness. The tips of the crosses, they would have a shin, or they'd be sitting on a little menorah, or there'd be a little like menorah and the cross on top. So everyone knew that a crypto-Jew lived there, under the guise of the crosses that were on the doorpost where the mezuzah used to be.
Unbelievable, absolutely wild and crazy. What I want to ask everyone here is, I think the thing that is baffling me and the most is to hear all the stories from each of you, and to learn that there was something so deep inside that was screaming out at you that you wanted to go against the grain, that you didn't want to do what was happening in Catholic school. Does anyone here have any idea how it could be that after so many generations, and we're talking hundreds of years, how could you still connect to this fire? Does anyone want to share their heritage answer?
Yeah, I think if you look at the prophet Ezekiel, there's a passage, a vision that he has. And that vision says that Hashem spoke to him and said, "Can these dry bones live?" And the prophet Ezekiel said, "Only you know that, Hashem." He didn't want to commit himself to a yes or no answer. And Hashem tells him to prophesy to those bones and speak to the dust. And as he's prophesying, these bones are coming back to life. And he said, "This is the people of Israel. At this messianic age, I will bring them back." And as I look at this, the way that I look at this is, we are the descendants of all of those Jews that died in the Iberian Peninsula, died in the New World as a result of this. And we were dead. The lines went cold. And then digital filming of genealogical records and genetic testing came along and made it possible for us to discover those roots. And all of a sudden, as a result of this, these dry bones and this dust is coming back to life. That's the only way that I can look at this. This is Hashem's doing. Hashem is bringing back the people because this is the Messianic age. I don't know how else to be able to explain that these sparks have come back into each one of us.
I would like to say something about that as well. I'm like fired up by everything that's being said here. Thank you, Joe. I just wanted to say that that for me, it was literally seeing the words of the Torah coming to life in my own life, and not just in my life, but meeting others who have gone through the same phenomenon that's going on all over the world. That's how I met Jeannie, and that's she inspired me and helped me, and from there it was just witnessing life after life, story after story. I actually connected with a cousin that I never knew who also had a similar story to mine, and wouldn't you know it, was an Orthodox Jew and invited me to Passover, to Pesach and everything, and we're third cousins, and we didn't even know each other, growing up in the same city, mind you, and we were able to celebrate Pesach together, and it's just really seeing these prophecies as Dr. Joe was saying, that are coming to life that before our eyes, and it's really it inspires me, and I think we're really seeing a phenomenon happening that gives us hope for not only our family's future and restoring our families to Judaism, but really hope for the future of Am Yisrael. Yom Ha'atzmaut Sameach, by the way.
Yom Ha'atzmaut Sameach. Happy Independence Day, everybody. I am going to Christina, unless you want to wrap with, do you have a thought that you want to share before I head out?
Sure. I think it's something you can't explain, but it's a spirit that is just there calling out to you, and it's so strong that there's no way you can deny it. And sometimes you just can't explain it, but you just know that it's in your soul and it's in your heart. And I'm such a passionate Jew today. Like everyone says, "Oh, you're more like the Jewish friends that I have. You're more Jewish than I am." I know all the story. I know all the histories. I know all of the traditions. I live them, and I live them with passion, because I am so thrilled to be able to come back, and it makes me very proud to be Jewish.
Everyone, I'm so thrilled that you have shared your stories with us. I am going to need to prepare a cocktail so that I can wind down from all of the jitters and chills that I have inside of me. Everyone, thank you so much. And we did have a question from the crowd, which was about making aliyah. And I just want to tell you that my name is Shanna Fold, and I've been your host. If you have questions about aliyah, I am going through the process right now. You can find me on Instagram, SHANNAFULD. I run a show called the Israel Daily News Podcast, and I do a daily roundup of the top 5 stories coming out of Israel every weekday, and I am a wealth of information, and I give it to you in 10 minutes in audio form. So everyone, thanks so much for being with us. Again, I'm here to answer any questions, and kol hakavod to all of you for bringing your souls.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Shalom.
Thank you.